Hi there. In this video, I will give you an example about the analytical procedures. But just to recap what we have discussed in the previous videos, we say the audit evidence comes usually after the understanding of the client operation, the assessment of risk, and start to collect some information about the internal control. Once we understand the internal control system, we decide if we trust this control. So we make some test of controls like inquiry, inspection, observation, and re-performance. And if we don't trust it, then we make substantive procedures. And in the previous video, I showed you all the elements of the audit evidence, along with the independence of the provider, the qualification of the provider, the awareness of the auditor, and the effectiveness of the internal control. In this last video about audit evidence, I'm going to give you an example about the analytical procedures to show you how to run analytical procedures and the importance of analytical procedures as a substantive test. So with this in mind, let us take a look first on the types of the analytical procedures and then with numerical examples. I am sure you covered the financial ratios in previous classes of accounting, but just to give you a quick snapshot about those ratios. First, we have one group of ratios that can cover the liquidity of the company. What do we mean by the liquidity of the company? The ability of the company to survive one more year by paying the normal liabilities, the current liabilities. And we can measure the liquidity by current ratio, quick ratio, operating cash flow. In the auditing course, I'm not going to ask you to calculate the ratio. If you need to know how to calculate it, you can go back to your notes of previous classes, or you can check online for them. But you need to know that those ratios, they measure the company's liquidity, which is the ability to pay the current liability within the coming year. The second group of ratios, we call it activity ratios, which evaluates the performance of the company by checking the accounts receivable turnover and the inventory turnover. And when we add both of them, we get the operating cycle. The third group of ratios, we call it profitability, where we check the gross profit margin, we check the return on assets, the net profit margin, and the return on equity. And then the coverage ratio, which we check the company's ability to cover their long-term liabilities by checking debt to equity and times interest earned. So let us take a look on this example. In this example, as you can see here, I gave you 5 years, 2012 up to 2016. And here there are some ratios. Feel free to stop my video and take a look on the numbers here. But for the sake of the video time, I'm gonna make some analysis and I will leave the rest for you to meditate upon those numbers and try to come up with conclusion for yourself. So first of all, if we look at the quick ratio, the quick ratio, it's actually a good measure for the company's liquidity. In 2012, it was 1.64. And when we reached to 2016, it became 0.97. So this can tell you that the ratio is decreasing. And what does it tell us? That the company experienced problem in paying the operating liabilities. We expect the quick ratio to be higher than 1, which means for every dollar we have in liability, we have $1 in current assets that can pay the liability away from the inventory value. So if the current ratio is low, the auditor will predict that the company has some problems with the operating liabilities. Now let us look at the inventory and the receivables. The days to collect the receivables, here it was 65.18. By 2016, it became 86.9, which means now it takes more time for the company to collect the due balances from the receivables. The days to sell the inventory, it was 108. Now it became 179. So now it takes the company more time to sell the inventory. So we predict that the company is facing some weakness in the collection cycle and in the sales cycle. Now let us go to the next part, which is the accounts receivable turnover. We have 5.6, and now it turns to be 4.2, which means it takes more time from the company to collect the due amount from the receivables. So the accounts receivable might have delinquent amounts. The inventory turnover, it's a 3.36. Now it became 2.03, which means that maybe some of the inventory items are obsolete. We cannot sell them. And because of that, the turnover is slower. And then the return on equity, the earning per share. It's very misleading here, because when you look at the earnings per share, it was 4.14, and here it's 4.3. So you feel the earning per share is quite stable. However, the return on equity, it was 0.11, it goes down to 0.05. So when we talk about the earnings per share, it might be misleading, but when we put it next to the return on equity, we know there is a big problem with the net income generated by the company. I hope you find this brief example about analytical procedure that's relevant to the analytical procedure as a substantive test, how to run the analytical procedures, how to come up with conclusion that might guide you in your auditing process. Thank you so much. And in the next video, I will talk about the audit documentation.